Jack Benjamin here, reporter for The Media Leader on day 2 of CTV World Summit. I'm joined by Simon Murray, the principal analyst at Digital TV Research. Simon, thanks for joining me. So you are about to go on stage, in fact, to talk a lot about the next 5 years of fast TV. What are you trying to communicate to this audience here?
Okay. We think we're expecting fast growth rapid growth of fast, up to $17 billion by 2029. That's up from $8 billion last year. Our forecasts cover about 138 countries, but we only think fast is going to have a real impact in 40 or 50 countries, so it's a fairly limited thing. And even despite that fast growth, doubling its revenues, we think fast will take only about 7% of total OTT revenues by 2029. So it's incremental. It was 5% last year, so it's growing, but it's not going to be huge, although there are opportunities to be had. We think the big players, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and Pluto TV, will take about 60% of the world's total. But in Europe, the situation is much different. And they'll only take about 40% of the total because local broadcasters are quite strong and they're gearing up not only their AVOD services but also their FAST services as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I mean, FAST is so big in the U.S. market compared to the European market, and I'm curious how that's expected to play out because obviously there's a European-based conference. Are people particularly optimistic that FAST channels can compete with the more established public service broadcasters that are more common in Europe, including the UK?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's completely different in the States, as you were saying, Jack. We think of that 17 billion revenues by 2029, 6.5 billion will be in the US. No other country will generate more than $1 billion in revenues, although Canada and the UK will be close. European revenues will be about 3.6 billion by then. Nearly all of that will be in Western Europe. And as I said before, yes, Europe's different from a lot of the Western world because there are strong local broadcasters that can make a real impact on the fast market.
What are some other big trends that we need to be watching? I mean, you guys do lots of research across the TV space and not just fast. What are some other big things that over the next few, let's say 4 or 5 years, are really going to change the way that the industry works?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some consolidation. I'm not going to name names, but I mean, they have been mentioned in the press before.
Yeah.
I think there's a more pessimistic outlook on the world at the moment. Netflix is doing very well, but the other players are cutting back on their content spend, increased focus on profitability. So they're reining in some of their expansion plans. The other thing to look out for is, of course, the big players adding advertising as an element to their offering. So the hybrid AVOD, SVOD tier is going to be really important. They're obviously digging into advertising revenues that exist already, so that makes it even more interesting.
You're the sort of crystal ball type of researcher looking into the future. How do you expect, especially those ad tiers, to play out, especially as we note that there's also lots of password sharing crackdowns going on? So Netflix did. I'm sure other streaming services are likely to follow. How is that going to affect the types of people that are tuned in to the advertising models in particular?
Yeah, I mean, password crackdowns benefited Netflix very much in the last year, although that's a one-off benefit because crackdown means some people think, I might as well pay for a subscription now if it's harder for me to get into the other services. That's something you gain once, and as you quite rightly said, the other players are doing the same thing. So they have a one-off benefit. The benefit of the hybrid AVOD SVOD tier is, of course, it's cheaper than the full subscription-only tier. And so when people become much more conscious about how much they're spending on these services, they might go for the cheaper option and suffer the ads or enjoy the ads, rather than spend the full subscription service to cut their household budget.
What would you say is the biggest challenge facing TV through this whole era? I mean, you mentioned consolidation's probably likely at some point. We've heard that before at our other conferences as well. But TV as a whole is going through a weird shift where there's linear audiences are declining, especially young people. Yeah, they're still interacting with TV, but it's in a lot of different ways, through streaming, through even short form or on YouTube, and interacting with some major broadcasters. what would you say is the biggest concern that broadcasters especially should be focused on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the first person to say this by any means, but what's happening in the States is not necessarily going to happen elsewhere. We haven't seen the levels of falling off a cliff cord cutting outside the US, that, especially in Europe. I think there is going to be some cord cutting, but I don't think it's going to be as bad. So that's something to look out for. The other thing is, of course, self-imposed cord cutting, whereby Sky, for example, is encouraging its satellite TV subscribers to convert to its streaming platforms now, because when they can offer a broadband service as well, they gain more money in the long run. Plus, it's actually cheaper for them to maintain streaming subscribers rather than satellite TV subscribers, which have an awkward dish on the side of your house. So that's one thing that's going to bear in mind. I think there's going to be more collaboration. I think there's been a lot of we're going to do our own thing, we're going to show these people what we can do. I think people realise that they probably can't do it on their own, so I think there'll be more partnerships in the future.
Lots to look forward to and lots to look out for. Thanks so much, Simon, for joining me.
My pleasure, Jack.
If you like this video, please subscribe. The Media Leader is the UK's leading source of analysis, opinion and data for people who work in advertising and media.